Truth is, I am Iron Man.
Something tells me a whole lot of people are about to die.
Hasta la vista, baby.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to the next video. Now today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to do a top 10 because I don't think I'm going to be seeing any films this weekend. None of them that are opening look particularly good to me. I'm not 100% on that, but there might not be any reviews until the first weekend in February. So with that out of the way, let's get into today's video, which is my top 10 favorite horror movies of the 21st century. So these are 10 classics that I think 100% deserve to be in the Horror Hall of Fame for their innovative storytelling and great scares, because after all, that is what we go to a horror movie expecting. I should mention that there won't be any big spoilers in this video. I'm going to be very vague with everything, so I mean, you know, this might kind of encourage you to see some of the films on this list that you haven't seen yet. Before we jump in, I want to give a few honorable mentions. These are films that almost made it onto the list. So we've got Cabin in the Woods, Gerald's Game, Paranormal Activity, Don't Breathe, and Signs. And those are my honorable mentions. I'm not going to talk about them, but those are films that almost made the list. In 10th place is The Mist. Now this is one of my favorite Stephen King adaptations because it's one of those movies that, yes, it's a very bleak, kind of disturbing in its tone and what it does with its characters. But that makes for a great film overall because not only does it have some really gnarly creatures in it, but it also explores psychologically what happens to human beings when they're isolated, when they're in the middle of a natural disaster, and they don't know who to turn to when things get bad. It also has a little bit of a subtle message to us as humans of what might happen if we mess with science a little bit too much. Sometimes it'll mess back. And I think The Mist is overall a really underrated film as a whole. Number 9 is It, Chapter 1, which is from 2017. I'm not talking about the 1990s version. I think the 2017 version is a lot better. So this is a film that is about Pennywise, a clown that obviously takes the form of what you're the most scared of, and because of that, you get a great variety of really over-the-top, horrific imagery. And while this can feel a little bit gratuitous at times, there are other times where it feels absolutely mortifying because you're following a group of kids, so you can definitely get behind and understand why they're so terrified. Speaking of the characters, they're actually pretty compelling. There are some nice subplots, and I feel like their backstories, each character's backstory, kind of plays a part in what they see in Pennywise and what they're afraid of. Overall, this is a great film based on a great book, and it's very scary. Number 8 is The Conjuring. One of my favorite horror films personally on this list is the one that's based on allegedly true stories of paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now, whether you believe in paranormal phenomenon or if you're a skeptic, there's something just really unnerving about the fact that somebody actually allegedly experienced these events. And yes, there is a lot of terrifying imagery in this movie, especially in terms of possession, evil spirits wreaking all sorts of havoc on this poor innocent family. And while The Conjuring does sort of just take a bunch of tropes from other movies and present us with the best scares based on those tropes, it's still very interesting and terrifying at the same time. I would compare this one to classics like Poltergeist or The Exorcist, but like I said, it kind of takes the best of those two movies and kind of compiles it together into one sort of horror reboot that actually kind of relaunched everyone's appreciation for horror as we see, you know, more horror franchises getting new entries post The Conjuring. So yeah, overall this is a great classic ghost story. You should definitely check it out if you haven't seen it, especially if you're a horror fan. Number 7 is Hereditary. This is another really great paranormal thriller, and for a long time you don't actually know exactly what's going on, and that's one of the great things of this film is there's even segments in it where you're kind of starting to wonder if it's all in the characters' heads. The acting overall in this film is really great, but Toni Collette is the real standout for me. And much like the other films in this list, I mean, I feel like I'm being redundant, but yeah, there's a lot of really nice, disturbing, terrifying imagery. This is a film that isn't afraid to get dark and dirty and right in your face about really tender concepts like grief, tragedy, and how we deal with those sorts of things. So, in a sense, the film feels like it kind of deals with real-world concepts very well. But in the third act, it kind of takes things in a really weird, bizarre direction, but nonetheless, I think this is a great horror film that has a lot of classic things, but also subverts your expectations a bit. Number 6 is The Babadook.
The Babadook.
Much like Hereditary, this is very much a psychological horror film where you're not entirely sure if what's going on is real or not. This is kind of a lower budget Australian flick too, so it focuses in on a couple of characters, specifically a family, a widow and her son, as he's growing up. And he kind of starts to develop, I guess both of them start to develop a sort of psychosis revolving around this book that they find, detailing a monster inside of it called the Babadook. As far as demonic possession and other sort of things go, this is another really disturbing horror film to watch if you're into that kind of stuff. Sometimes I think it gets a little bit more praise than it deserves. It doesn't do a whole lot that's very original, but it's still very scary, and it tends to keep the monster itself out of frame a lot, so you don't really get a good glimpse at it, and that makes it a whole lot scary as well. It's kind of one of those classic rules of horror. And once again, in this one, we get a lot of really great, top-notch acting to go along with it. So definitely check this one out if you haven't seen it, which a lot of people probably haven't. Number 5 is The Conjuring 2. Wow, look at that. 2 Conjuring films make it onto this one list. Well, guess what? The second one has all the great, intense scares of the first one, as well as the characters returning, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are based on real people, but it also dives deeper into their characters, which makes the film overall more interesting and more impactful. It kind of carries on a sort of legacy from the first film, because while the two are basically just investigating another case in their list of many paranormal occurrences, this one has a sort of devilish connection to them that the film explores later in the third act, and it even sets up a couple of spin-offs that aren't as good as The Conjuring 2, but this is certainly still worth a watch. If you liked the first Conjuring, you'll like this one. Number 4 is It Follows. Now this one is a real masterpiece in low-budget horror. It really utilizes subtle visuals and really great sound design to craft its scares, because there really isn't a whole lot of stuff in this movie. There's no monsters, there's no ghosts necessarily. Like I said, most of what works in this film works because of its subtlety. The acting is all great, the direction is great, the soundtrack is really kind of retro, and I love that. And of course the concept is very unique in that we see kind of a demonic possession in the form of an STD, which I don't really consider that to be a spoiler because it's in the trailer, so there are still a lot of really nice scares and surprises in the movie, and it's kind of a nice throwback to the old school horror flicks that some of us were used to. Number 3 is A Quiet Place. Now, probably the most recent film on this list, and also one of the shortest. A Quiet Place is not just a great horror film, but it's also a great drama about a family trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic world. John Krasinski and real-life wife Emily Blunt kind of helmed this together, and he does a really great job in all categories. The direction is great, the acting is spectacular, and the creatures are terrifying because you can't make a single sound or they will come and rip you to pieces before you can even blink. And because Emily Blunt's character is pregnant at the time, this presents a whole lot of problems, and while this does technically devolve into a very simple type of thriller, it's definitely the best of the bunch that we've gotten out of the 21st century, and I have to really commend John Krasinski for entering the horror genre with such a triumphant entrance. In second place is Get Out. This is probably one of the most talked about films on this list, and it is also Jordan Peele's directorial debut in the horror genre. And it's actually quite good. It's so weird too, because the guy has a background of comedy, but he comes in and makes a film like this. Get Out definitely takes a very bizarre concept and kind of tries to make it into a very realistic sort of film. So once you kind of find out what's going on, which you don't until very late in the film, you're kind of like, is that really possible though? And while it probably isn't, it's still really unnerving to think about. And much like a lot of the other films on this list, it doesn't give you direct answers to what's going on until towards the end. It starts off ramping up the suspense, one after another, with very subtle scares too. There aren't a lot of jump scares in the movie. It relies very much on slow building tension. I have a feeling this film is going to become a cult classic for years and years to come, so I'm excited to see what everybody thinks of it. Let me know what you think of Get Out in the comments. Do you think it's better than Us, which if you don't know is Jordan Peele's next horror film, which came out in 2019? I didn't personally think it was as great, but that's for another video. Let's move on to number 1. Which is The Descent. This is probably a film that would be on my top 10 favorite horror movies of all time list, if I'm being honest. There's something just really unnerving about being trapped in an underground cave, especially if you're claustrophobic, and director Neil Marshall really makes use of that to build tension with falling rocks and dead-end tunnels. There's constantly a threat in this film, and funnily enough, the actual monsters that do show up towards the end don't show up until about an hour into the movie. And like all of the best horror films, this one isn't just about the monsters, it's not just about the cave, it's not about the scares, it's about the characters, and it's kind of about what friendship means to people. Can you trust your friends? If a life and death situation were to come around, Could you trust them? What kind of secrets are they hiding from you? And those are all really nice ideas to explore. And even though the monsters don't show up till the end, you're very much on edge up until that point because of all of the kind of clues that they give you. And the direction and overall atmosphere is very scary, very claustrophobic, and it is everything that I wanted from a film with a concept like this. That's going to be it for this video, guys. I know this was kind of a short video, but I just kind of wanted to give my general thoughts. I didn't want to spend a long time editing this video, so there might be something else coming this weekend. If not, the following week, I will get some more videos out. As always, don't forget to drop a like, and down in the comments, let me know what your top 10 favorite horror movies of the 21st century list would be, and what you think of mine. Of course, remember that everybody's opinion is perfectly valid, it's just an opinion. And with that out of the way, I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.